Welcome to Whole Health. We're happy you're here on this journey of exploration with us as we learn what it means to live a life dedicated to spiritual, mental, and physical health. Before we begin our program, we want to share a brief legal disclaimer. The information provided on this program, including any health-related advice or discussions, is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before making any decisions regarding your health. Now, let's turn it over to Pastor Jeremy, Dr. Kala Kleen, and Brittany Pfeifner for today's episode of Whole Health.
Hey, welcome back to Whole Health, where faith meets function, and we explore what it means to honor God by honoring our bodies as sacred temples of the Holy Spirit. Now, in our last episode, we talked about the difference between lifespan and health span. Not just how many years we live, but how many of those years we live with energy, vitality, and purpose. Now, today we're exploring two sides of the same coin, nutrition and fasting. First, we're going to talk about how God designed food to fuel our bodies, why nutrition today isn't the same as it once was, and how we can be intentional stewards of what and how we eat. Then, in the second half, we're going to look at fasting, how Scripture frames it, what science reveals, and how to practice it wisely. But first things first, let me lay a quick foundation for food, biblically speaking. And trust me, the Bible has a lot to say about the things that we should eat and certainly things that we shouldn't. I think it's important to know that food was part of God's original plan and provision for us, His creation. In Genesis 1:29, God says, "I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." In 1 Kings chapter 4, there's an outline for us of King Solomon's daily provisions. We're actually told King Solomon was the wisest man, so that must be a pretty wise meal, maybe something to look at and reflect on. When Daniel and his friends were taken to Babylon, they faced a familiar challenge to many that we face today. Cultural food that looked appealing but wasn't aligned with God's design. See, the king's food was rich, it was indulgent, and often sacrificed to idols. But Daniel made a kind of a counterculture choice. He asked to be tested for 10 days on whole plant food and water, food straight from the earth, unprocessed and pure. And at the end, Scripture tells us they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Now, Daniel's story shows that obedience and discipline matter more than indulgence. Today, our king's table, it might look like, drive-through restaurants, processed snacks, convenience foods that kind of dull our energy instead of fueling our purpose. Stewardship means choosing food that serves our body, not rules over it. So, let me ask you this. Why isn't food as nutrient dense as it used to be? And maybe in addition to that, how does soil health reflect how we steward our creation?
Yeah, so here's the hard truth. Our food today just isn't as nutrient rich as it was in our grandparents' generation. We've overfarmed the land, we spray it with chemicals, and stripping away the soil from the nutrients that it needs, like magnesium, zinc, selenium, all those things that make our food nourishing in the first place. So if our soil doesn't have the nutrients it needs at the foundation, obviously our food we're eating is not going to be as nutrient dense as well.
Right.
And where it kind of gets complicated when we start talking about nutrition and what nutrients are, because so many people are doing their best and they just still come up short. And not because they don't care, but because they haven't been taught how to connect like what's on their plate to what's happening in their body. Right. I often hear stories that are like, I'm trying to make a healthier choice, or my family's eating this, but I'm choosing, this organic, mac and cheese over, this fast food that the rest of my family's eating. And it might be a step in the right direction, right? Like maybe that is a healthier choice. So thinking about ingredients and trying to make a good choice, but it's not a picture of true nourishment. And I mean, I'm not trying to point fingers or make people feel bad, because we've all been there, sure. Right? Mm-hmm. Choosing what we think is better, but not realizing that it still is falling short and giving our body
the better of the two worst options.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Like a lesser of two evils, right? But it's still not fantastic for us. And so a lot of times what's missing isn't willpower. People aren't just like not motivated enough. They just don't know. So when we start to learn about food and our food, what we eat is like literally like information for your body. What we eat can like turn your genes on and off. It fuels our energy, regulates inflammation. It changes everything. So I don't want to preach perfection. It's about awareness and progress. So And I want to be very clear that I am not perfect. My kids are not perfect. Their very favorite food is orange chicken. It's their number one request.
Yes, that's a good one.
So we are not like, the healthiest family in the entire universe over here. So but we also want to create good habits with food. So we're not banning anything. Like, I'm not telling my kids that we can't have orange chicken, but special occasions, like, we will go and get some because
Sure.
we have healthy relationships. We teach it as a sometimes food. So we eat these sometimes because if we eat these all the time, our bodies do not feel good. We're not gaining meaningful nutrition.
Right.
So
We call it a cheat day in our house.
yeah. So perfect. So we like, if they have a birthday party or birthday or something, we are getting these things. We're creating good habits, but we are making exceptions for, to live normal life. But so we kind of, the goal of a lot of this podcast, I think, is just like giving knowledge, helping families understand why certain fuels fuel their life and other ones don't. But there is hope. We can we can work on fixing our kitchen, get an education, and then back to the soil at the ground level, like regenerative farming practices, things like crop rotation, composting, those types of things help restore the nutrients back into the soil, which I know that you probably know a lot about with your current journey.
We're figuring that out at the homestead, having to test the soil and figure out where we can plant the right trees, and whether it's fruit trees or nut trees or even just trees in general, also with the gardening that we're working through. So yeah, it's actually amazing to me. I was pretty shocked when we started testing the soil and we saw how depleted it was in so many things that you're told are necessary for, good food to grow. And so, you start to do things that will help replenish the soil. And, the Bible even talks about a rest year. Now, I know it's hard to do that in a society like this, where you're just constantly having to fill the shelves of, 350 million Americans, plus much of the rest of the world, by the way, as well. So not always easy to give that rest year to 1,000-acre farm, but there are practical principles in that at some level we're going to have to figure out.
Yeah, absolutely. So like restoring the health of your soil so we can have nutrient-rich crops and plants, right? So that in turn is going to create nutrient-rich people. So you are what you eat. So it's kind of the same concept we use in functional medicine. We're going to fix the root, the soil, and then so the rest of the system can kind of come back to life. Talking about just like different types of food. So organic produce tends to have higher antioxidants and nutrients. And then even like your animal diet. So the meats that you eat, the animals you're eating matters. So if you eat, beef that eats a lot of grain, then that meat that you're eating is going to be higher in omega-6s, which are more inflammatory, versus if you can get grass-fed beef, it's going to be higher in omega-3s, which are anti-inflammatory. So healthy soil is going to have a thriving microbiome, just like your healthy gut. That's the goal, so that we can restore the soil not to be depleted, so that we don't have depleted people. It's kind of a whole circle.
Right. Gosh, it's certainly not easy to, weigh it all out and figure even at times where the right place to start is, because when you start to approach some of this, you realize that, there's so many areas, but if you just start in one, and I think that's the problem with a lot of the way people approach things, is they'll look at the whole thing and go, well, I can't do anything at all because it's just totally out of whack. But if you start on one thing, even if it's the smallest issue, and you start to work there, that's what we've been trying to do out at the homestead, here's an area, let's deal with this acre. This is where we want to put the fruit trees. And so this is the, pH that we're going to need in the soil. And this is the kind of thing that we need to do. And so we're just approaching it with this is what we can do mindset, and, trusting the Lord to help us work out some of the other areas. So when we talk about soil health and farming practices, it's really about going back to God's blueprint, right? Restoring the roots so that the, fruit can thrive. But even if you're doing your best to eat local, eat organic, even eat regenerative foods, there's, always another layer most people never think about: the standards we use to measure nutrition in the first place.
Exactly. So here's something a lot of people don't realize: those tiny nutrition labels on the back of your food packages that say like percentage of daily value, those numbers are based on data from the 1950s, designed around like a 150-poundish man whose main goal was just to avoid disease, like scurvy, rickets. Like, he was just trying to not get disease. They were
from the 1950s.
Yes.
Not sensible. Okay.
Yeah. They're not meant to define like what's ideal for like thriving, right? So like energy, brain health, longevity, only enough to avoid disease. Most people that we work with are not trying to just avoid disease, right?
It's a low bar.
Yeah, it's on the floor for this. Like, they're trying to get, they want their energy back. They want to focus better, have patience with their kids. They don't want to crash in the afternoon. Like, these are a lot of the common complaints that people have when they're coming in, because they're like, I don't want to just survive. I want to thrive, right? So those RDAs, those are survival numbers. and especially with today's like chronic stress, we're constantly, even if you don't feel stressed, being able to be text or emailed whenever, getting someone getting a hold of you at all times is a stressor, right? To our toxin exposure, our nutrient depleted food, those minimums requirements are just not enough for like modern day man, and especially if you're like an athlete or my husband's bigger than 150 pounds. So like these are not going to be enough for him.
Right.
Or if you're a new mom, you're nursing a baby or just busy in general, those requirements are just not sufficient.
So there's so many variables that they didn't take into account. It wasn't part of their process. And so we're looking at these nutrition labels and we're thinking, oh, well, it has 100% of this and 50% of that, when in fact, it's based on incorrect data, not the entire picture. And so that's kind of scary. What about vitamins, for instance? Because if our nutrition is, it's difficult to get all of the nutrition we need from the foods that we're eating, a lot of times we're going to want to supplement that. Vitamins are a great way to do it, but not all vitamins are created equal, right? I mean, just because something says it's fortified, it doesn't mean that your body can actually use it. Maybe help us understand a little bit of that.
Yeah, exactly. So the sources matter. So when you look at that package and it says 100% of what you need, a lot of these times these companies are choosing like the cheapest, least bioavailable form. So it's kind of like if you have a present and you wrap it in a layer of duct tape in your body, you just can't open it. Like it's here's your nutrients, but your body can't actually utilize it. So the source matters. So when we start refining our grains, we're stripping out the natural nutrients. And that's why manufacturers began fortifying foods. So they process them so much so they can stay on our shelf forever, but then they add in synthetic vitamins so that you look at it and you're like, no, I am getting some meaningful nutrition from this, not knowing that it's lacking. A lot of times those vitamins can contain contaminants, which actually makes your body have to work overtime to detox.
I saw a study recently about fish oils, how a majority of the fish oils on the market were not just lacking, but some of it even was testing as rancid.
So not only rancid, but then too, back to like why we prefer organic grass-fed beef, compared to the corn-fed. Corn was not native to their diet. And so we're changing the very diet and we're going to get a different metabolic thing with the meat. And a lot of times people are like, oh, but the marbling's so much better. And it's like, well, just because it's better doesn't mean it's good for you.
Right.
It might be a flavor appeal for some people. Same thing with omega-3. So my husband's a chemical engineer and their company had a spin-off division that they were going to start raising fish in a factory. So like not even in native waters, but they can treat it and get all the pHs. So it looked like they were either freshwater fish or seawater fish, and their fuel source was corn. And so then you can get fish that are then harvested for fish oil for supplementation.
Oh my goodness!
And manufacturing, and it still can be considered organic if they're feeding it organic corn. But yet that's not the diet that fish are supposed to have. And so the whole supplement industry, I mean, I don't want the FDA to get involved.
Right.
Because there's already things that they've
100%.
got their hands full with that I don't think that they do entirely well. I do think there's some things that they've done very well. I don't want to discount that there has been some things. We could probably have a 20-hour conversation very superficially on some things we've observed over the years that we're questioning.
Especially of late.
Yeah, absolutely, especially of late. But when it comes to the supplement industry, it's kind of like the wild, wild west of unregulation. And I think that that's good in some ways, but it makes it very hard as a consumer to understand, well, where is the sourcing coming from? And how do I determine what's a good supplement versus a bad supplement? And
that's such a strong key, sourcing. Like being able to know where your vitamins are coming from. And I don't mean, well, they come from Amazon, because a lot of what comes from Amazon comes from overseas, comes from China, unregulated factories. You have no idea. Some of that stuff is being tested independently and they're finding almost trace amounts of what's supposed to be in there. So knowing where your vitamins are sourced, that's a key for sure. It might be a decent time to bring up, I know somebody who does some vitamin sourcing and productions, maybe talking to Dr. Kalla about vitamin intake and stopping by Back in Line Family Chiropractic for your next vitamin refill would be a great idea. I certainly get some of my supplements there. I also source supplements from other places that I'm, investigating. I like to be able to see, independent lab testing results on vitamins and minerals that I'm putting into my body. But not everybody is as concerned with that. I think you have to weigh out what's important to you.
Well, and just like for the listeners out there, I mean, what we have found, we ask and encourage our patients that even if they don't buy it from our office, we do have biases, but, you know, Brittany and I have toured the manufacturing facilities and to understand the QA, the quality control, quality assurance process from literally start to finish, from when they grab the raw materials by the time it gets in a capsule, and even from like as it pertains to fish. So, based on the pollution of even the oceans, we have to worry about, you know, additional mercury and some of those contents. And so fish in Norway are actually really, really great fish. But the problem is with U.S. Customs is they sit in customs the fish for 18 months. And that's where we get the rancid. So even though the fish at the time of capture is a really good, higher quality, low toxic fish, just based on by the time we can get it in a capsule, it's not the best source for us. Sure. But based on the currents and the tides, our sourcing comes from off the coast of Chile because there's a 6-month process. So from the time the fish is caught, by the time it's in the capsule, it's a 6-month period.
Okay. And
so, you know, with the kind of the nuances of the industry, when patients come in, and so if we see them have like a low vitamin D or suboptimal vitamin D, we encourage them to be on our product. And even if they elect for an economic purpose, all I have them, like the negotiation point is, let's see what happens at retesting, whether you stick with ours or stick with, you know, with a different brand product, you know, whatever. But we just make sure that the dosing is apples to apples. If I want them on 5,000 IUs, if they're not on our product, I just still want them on 5,000 IUs of another product. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, if they're on our product and when they don't, then their levels don't improve based on the dose we put them, that actually tells us, okay, why did this not happen? We believe and we know our quality is a great quality product. If it's something that they are taking, we're often biased to say it might be your product. The label, it can say it contains 5,000 IUs, but there's no guarantee at the time of it. But we know the physician pharmaceutical grade, there is a guarantee based on the manufacturer's guarantee. And so if I were to take our own products that we choose to partner with and send them to a third party, there's an absolute 100% guarantee that what they say is in at the bottle for the dosing, it matches. But we have found some things that are, you know, some cancers and some other metabolic diseases when patients' labs don't improve when we've put them on a pharmacological physician grade dose. And so that's why sometimes some of the sourcing can be really helpful or non-helpful, that then patients just have really expensive urine.
Right. And gosh, you hear that a lot. You know, it is important that you're checking into your sourcing, but also making sure that you know what vitamins to take. Gosh, I was talking to somebody a week or so ago, and he kind of ran me through his morning supplementation, and I think it took him over 5 minutes just to name all of the vitamins. And I started to wonder, like, how capable is the body of even dealing with all of that in such a short system? Is that...
Yeah. So we actually had a conversation with a coworker the other day. She was like, okay, I'm a little bit concerned about how many supplements we have and like how many we're recommending. And so we had to kind of break things down of like, okay, a lot of times people come in for lab work and we're supplementing based on what their body needs now. This is not forever. So if we do a lot of gut stool tests, stuff like that, they might need a handful of supplements to get them through because we're trying to target certain, pathogenic bacteria or yeast or parasites, things like that. So it's like a protocol. But then once we've kind of eliminated those things, we go to like, a daily, kind of a maintenance. So if we're talking about like, what are some foundational nutrients that you can take? You shouldn't have a list a mile long that you're taking every day, but some good foundation. If you're taking nothing and you're like, want to maybe clean up your diet, but you haven't gotten there yet, you know that there's some nutritional gaps. The good place to start is like just a good multivitamin, like a physician grade. If you take like the ones we have in our office, some people take them, they're like, at first it makes them like nauseous or something because they're so much stronger than the ones that you'll get from like
the
Walgreens.
One a days.
Yes, the one, yes. Because we got 4 capsules. Some people start with 2 and have to work up and take them with food. But like I notice a significant difference taking those versus like another product. Omega-3s, like Kala talked about, are just really good baseline. A probiotic, your gut health will thank you for that. And vitamin D3 plus K2 is good for your bones, your hormones, especially living in Iowa. Unless you live outside all the time, most people are going to need that.
Right.
But remembering that supplements are tools, they're not replacements. So you can't just out supplement your way from like a poor diet or poor nutrition, but using them, you can strategically use them to help your body to feel better, especially if you're in a transition of like trying to fuel your body better. And support, how God made your body and God's provision of food, not replacing it with supplements.
Sure, I love that. How God's original design for nourishment started in simplicity, real food, straight from creation. Such a good reminder, strong reminder that health isn't just about what we eat, but how we care for the whole process. And man, I'm learning a lot. Thank you. You guys are amazing.
Yeah, so that process doesn't just stop once the food like leaves our plate, right? Well, how we digest and absorb these nutrients is just as important as the food itself. We have people come in who have like a really great diet, but you know what they're eating, but their body isn't able to digest it and absorb it well because they have some chaos going on in their gut in the first place. So digestion is like the biggest job your body does every day, which is why when Kala talks about fasting, it's very interesting how this all plays in. And we're going to do a full episode on gut health because I love it and I'm excited. So this is just a little tiny snippet, but like most of the time when you eat, from eating to elimination, a healthy cycle takes like 16 to 24-ish hours. Okay. Wow. So if you eat something and immediately need to go to the bathroom, that's not great. You're not getting nutrients from that. Your stomach empties halfway to about 3 hours, fully in about 5. Then it goes to your small intestine, then to your colon. So your body needs all that time to absorb those nutrients and to remove waste. So it's too fast, you're losing nutrients before you can absorb it. Too slow, and then that waste just lingers and it's breeding bad bacteria and inflammation. So if you know someone's like chronically constipated, a lot of kiddos, normally that's the way the spectrum goes. I don't have kids who come in a lot with diarrhea. It's more constipation. So just slowing down the digestion so much.
Well, and they've even found and proven that in patients which they call slow transient or slow motility or constipation, if patients are on medications, they're actually reabsorbing some of their own medication metabolites. And so sometimes they can be getting double and triple doses.
Oh, wow.
And so to take, in healthcare, we've seen constipation be normalized. It's just so common. And so just take Miralax versus figuring out but why is this happening? And, with the transient times and digestion alone, one of the easiest things that many Americans that we all fail or struggle with is just slow eating. Yeah. Chewing, sitting down, smelling our food, looking at our food, prayer beforehand. Being mindful. Yeah. And being mindful of okay, is this food meant to nourish or satisfy emotional, an emotional craving? I remember during the pandemic, a colleague had talked about putting a Post-it note in your pantry to say, "Are you bored, or will you eat chicken or broccoli right now?" Because usually if you go in the pantry, it's not a real food, And I actually thought that was so profound because so many people they're just like, "What do I do? I'm just aimlessly walking around," and created some of that unhealthy relationship with food in general.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the constipation being so normalized and we're just taking Miralax. I had someone talk about their 10-month-old baby who's eating lots of foods, very little formula, and they're putting Carol syrup in his bottle every day because he's so constipated.
Wow. So
just his foundation, this poor little guy is just that's how they're doing. He's like, yeah, he's constipated. He loves ice cream. And I'm like, babe, there's some things we could do to help him out so that he's not struggling without having to put, Carol syrup and all other medications in his bottle every day. But just the knowledge is just lacking. There's this is what they did for me when I was a kid. So.
Right. Wow.
But kind of going back to the digestion portion of it, Cal is going to go into this a little bit more in a few minutes, but just an overview. Different foods digest at different speeds, like your carbs, like fruit, those move more quickly, where your proteins digest more slowly. Fats take the longest. So your stomach can only handle about 10 grams of fat per hour. So if you're eating a fast food meal that's got 60 grams of fat in it, that could still be in your system 2 days later.
Wow.
Well, and that's too fast food fat, the trans fats is different than some of the saturated fats from what, there is a good fat and bad fat. But yeah, the bad fats, the body overload, not a good thing.
It seems like every time I drive by a fast food restaurant, the line's around the building. So it's been years, actually. Maybe once or twice a year, Brooke and I will, give in and eat a Culver's burger. And
why is it always Culver's, man?
It is amazing. But, we really just try not to participate because it's so easy to lose yourself in that and to lose control of your health, your wellness. I mean, there have been times where I've eaten even at a restaurant and later in the day actually felt hungover.
Yes, that's a real thing.
Maybe too much salt in the food. I'm not sure what the reasoning behind it is, but we used to only eat out once a week on Sundays, and we haven't even done that in a few months because it's just is it worth it? It's hard to say.
That's actually really common when patients come in, and we'll encourage them to do like a Whole30, or we also like another one with JJ Virgin, especially for moms and kids, because on the JJ Virgin diet, she has you eliminate the 7 most food intolerant foods. But for the families, especially of young kids, you can still have like grains like quinoa and rice, but no gluten. The Whole30 is absolutely like no grains whatsoever. And so sometimes it's a little bit harder to get your kids to have the hunger satiated because they're just eating in meat and vegetables. It's still a great thing to do with kids. But after sometimes that 28 or 30-day period, their body has learned to crave the very things that they've learned to eat over that 30-day period. Well, then when they go and have their first splurge, they feel so wrecked and it doesn't feel good. Right. And it's like, we've been conditioned to give our body like what it doesn't like. So we talk about the sugar addiction, and it's like they did a study where they had lab rats. There was like 10 generations of lab rats. So these rats had never seen outside of like society.
Oh,
and gosh. They, their first dose, they gave them cocaine. And then for like 2 to 3 weeks, which is like, years and years in lab rat lifespan, right. Then they gave them table sugar. And so they were fiending for their next, I have this reverse. They first gave them sugar, and then they got them high on cocaine. And that was like timed, for a week's period. And then what they did is they had all these lab rats that were fiending for their next cocaine fix, and they put sugar and cocaine out, and they all went to the sugar.
Wow.
And it was a study that just proved like sugar is more addictive than cocaine. But, it's like one of those things that like we literally crave some of these very unhealthy foods, and it's messing with our brain chemistries. And so that's why sometimes it's a shock and awe when people haven't been eating vegetables, haven't been eating fruit, that they get a GI upset. I had a patient that we were starting to put her on a more real food diet, and she said the GI doctor told her that she had food sensitivity to real food. And I was so mad and angry about this, for a long period of time. And the more I got to thinking about it, I'm like, he wasn't wrong. She wasn't she didn't have the gastric juices to break down. Like if you take somebody who's been a vegan and you give them, 10 ounces of chicken, it actually could kill them because they don't have the digestive enzymes and the kidney capability to break that down. And so it is one of those things that like, we have conditioned our bodies on a poor fuel source.
Sure.
And so I'm glad that you don't feel good on fast food. I pray for all of us on that.
Wow. So just kind of, catching up, all of the right carbs, all the right proteins, all of the right fats and not the wrong fats. Maybe get into a little bit of the functional medicine side of this, the labs, nutrient gaps,
Yeah, absolutely. So, first and foremost, I think Brittany and I as healthcare providers, like we want people to focus so much more on the real food versus the supplementation. The supplementation is a lot of time it's the filling in the gaps or the extra credit. It kind of depends too, like on the season of life. But in functional medicine, what we do is that we run very common lab work, but we look through it with a different type of magnifying glass. So in conventional healthcare, we're taught like there's clinical ranges. So vitamin D is one of my favorite tests to run on patients. I think it should be ran twice a year, especially for those of us in Iowa. But we have a clinical range is between 30 and 100. So if you go to your primary care and you're at 29, you are officially clinically vitamin D deficient. But if your level is 30 or 31, you're technically not clinically deficient. From our lens or our magnifying glass, we say, no, that's definitely suboptimal. And we think that range needs to be between 60 and 80, independent of any sort of symptomatology. The reason why we want that is we care about patients' immunity, their bone health, their cognitive health, memory, immune function, all of the things is just so important as it pertains to vitamin D. Similarly, we care a lot about like vitamin B12 and folate. And so a whole nother topic is like methylation or some what we call like MTHFR. There's some other genetic pathways all about how we absorb and utilize our B vitamins. Some people are ultra metabolizers of their B vitamins, and some people are very poor metabolizers of their B vitamins. And so if we just did a serum B9 or B12, patients will be like, whoa, I'm excessive. How high is that? Or why am I so high? And we can correlate sometimes with symptomatology as it pertains to the B vitamins. But if we do a serum B9 and B12, it doesn't tell us but what's in the red blood cell. So we can have a lot of it circulating out, but we really need to be able to make sure that it's being driven. So it's nice to have both serum B9 and B12 as well as the red blood cell. We like the red blood cell B9 to be 650 and 1500 nanograms per milliliter. And then same thing with the B12 between 800 and 2000. High homocysteine, that's another biomarker. We run this one often for cardiovascular. The higher the homocysteine, the more vascular inflammation or endothelial dysfunction that we can see as a result. And really how we drive down that high homocysteine is by supporting the B9, B6, and B12 pathways. And we do see that number come down fairly quickly. Another one is iron and ferritin. And again, we're a pro real food, real animal food diet. And we do think red meat, especially organic grass-fed red meat, is very helpful. For our men and women, we want both iron and ferritin to be between 80 and 100. Again, that range, we've seen labs let patients go as low as 25, which I think is reckless and unfair, especially for patients that have like fibromyalgia or brain fog and fatigue. Iron and ferritin is the carrier of oxygen, and oxygen is a huge fuel source for anti-inflammation and anti-disease. So sometimes just making that small change of either, doing a check on how much red meat are you eating, or just, making sure that multivitamin contains iron. I do want to note though that too high of iron and ferritin is common in men sometimes. Women don't have this much of a problem because we bleed monthly. But a lot of times too, we have to educate our patients on, well, when was your iron tested? Where were you at in your cycle? Because your primary care might say that, oh, you're fine then, but what happens? And let's talk more about the days of your cycle. So it's just really important for that. ALK phosphatase is just another great enzyme. We want our patients between 70 to 80. And usually if you're below that actually we can prove it and do additional testing, but usually that's a functional zinc deficiency. Zinc is really important for thyroid health as well. So we'll see those things kind of go hand in hand. So oftentimes just based on the testing, what we observe, even with patients with a whole foods diet, we see deficiencies in magnesium, zinc, selenium, the omega-3s. And the reason why we see the deficiency in the omega-3s is for those who love eating omega-6 fatty acids from their animal sources, B vitamins, iron, and so forth. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So a lot of times, again, just with labs, normal just doesn't mean optimal. We want to avoid disease and we want to feel alive. But now how does food become energy? So it's pretty incredible how our body takes on carbs, fats, and proteins, and we want a nice variety of them through that carb breakdown. And that the carb, is like kind of like our quick fuel. So even if it's fruits and veggies, it enters our body as glucose, converts to pyruvic, and then to acetyl-CoA. However, if we're low in B1 and insulin, it's going to be kind of like a sluggish process to convert that energy. Same thing with fats. Fats can be our long-lasting fuel. But again, if we're going to eat fats, we also want to make sure that we have adequate sources of the carnitine, vitamin C, and CoQ10. Proteins, these are the builders and backup fuel. Proteins, especially, I can appreciate patients who elect to be vegan and vegetarian as long as it's the real food, vegan and vegetarian. I have not found, it doesn't mean that they don't exist here in the grain belt, corn belt, but I have not found somebody who can do it well and eat enough variety of their proteins to get a complete amino acid profile. Wow. Amino acids, the easiest way to get it is through animal proteins, but for our vegans and vegetarians, it's very hard to do that. I usually have to refer people who want to maintain that lifestyle to somebody who can better support them, because it's just, from a micronutrient standpoint, it's very, very hard to do. And oftentimes they need to be supported with even more supplementation compared to those who eat animal meat.
And it's really difficult because I've had vegans do food intolerance panels, and when they comes back and they need to cut out a bunch of things, they're left with like hardly anything on their diet left to eat. It's so restricted that it becomes impossible to do. So then they, get discouraged because they're like, I can eat 4 things now. And then now they're not getting enough nutrients, right? Because we've cut out all these foods. So I agree that it's difficult to support.
Well, and there's a lot of studies that when you look at the study, the design of the study for the most part was good when it's like kind of the anti-red meat and like red meat causing certain types of cancers and cardiovascular disease and being a fuel for it. But the hard thing is it's a good study, it's done well, but the holes in this study is that it's only looking at meat as the only variable. And they're not looking at, but what were they taking for omega-3 and is there any micronutrient deficiencies? And I think the consequence of when patients' health goes awry when they're on a high red meat or carnivore diet could be because they're lacking some of these B vitamins for proper absorption, utilization, and detoxification. And that can be genetic predisposition. Brittany, I know you don't mind me sharing this. Brittany has a hard time with iron, even with high doses of supplementation. But we see that in her family line.
Yep. It's just for us, it's genetic. My mom has me, so like we have to be really mindful of testing, and that was one of the points I wanted to make of like women who like post childbirth, and if you have any sort of trauma while you're doing it, your iron can be just on the ground, and that can take a while to build back up. So like I've done like iron infusions in the past, so that's a really good just information for new moms to have. If you're like, I am so fatigued still, like it's 3 months and I'm just not where I need to be, like having your iron levels checked. And then if they're really low, like I've done it both ways, where I've done an infusion versus I've just taken the supplements, and I felt so much better, so much quicker with the infusion. So just an option that I didn't even know was an option.
Infusion. That's amazing.
Well, and I think too, in the conventional model, what we witness is that's the postpartum diagnosis. This is postpartum depression. You're tired, you're fatigued. But very rarely are they actually testing mom after babies are born for any of these things. It's like, oh, this happens. We see this so commonly. So we've normalized symptomatology. That's like, let's just look a little further and figure out this. Why? You're a happy person, very spiritual, faithful person. You shouldn't feel this run down. And I think they've normalized, well, you're just a mom. This is that fatigue. And it's like, this isn't what every new mom feels.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
Talk about setting a low standard there. Let's transition. We're talking about fueling the body. Let's talk about resting the body. Now that we understand how God designed our bodies to receive nourishment, we should look at His equally important design for that rest day, that fasting that our body also thrives under. We've already talked about how food will fuel the body, how the nutrients we eat build energy at the cellular level, but just as important as fueling is resting. God didn't design the body to be in constant intake mode. He created rhythms, seasons of feeding and seasons of rest, seasons of day and night, work and Sabbath. Fasting is one of those rhythms, a chance for the body and the spirit to renew. So just like with nutrition, let's lay a biblical foundation for fasting. Obviously, you can find in Scripture fasting from the Old Testament to the New. In Exodus chapter 34, you see Moses fasted before receiving the Ten Commandments. Daniel chapter 9, Daniel fasted for clarity and consecration. I think one of the most famous stories on fasting is in Matthew chapter 4, where it says Jesus fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. And he didn't do that to weaken himself, but to strengthen his spirit for ministry. Now, we know also the early church fasted for discernment and direction. Acts chapter 13, there was a bunch of guys together in Antioch, and they were in fasting and prayer, and the Holy Spirit came in and said, hey, separate me, Barnabas and Paul. We're going to go out into ministry. And that's when the missionary journeys of Paul began. Fasting's about purpose, to learn discipline and dependence on the Lord. There's a clarity component and certainly a worship component. When we fast, we kind of quiet the noise. We remember that our strength and our sustenance, it comes from God, not from what's on our plate. Fasting is less about restriction, and it's more about realignment, body, mind, and spirit all coming back into focus. So, Dr. Kala, what happens in the body when we fast?
Yeah, what I love about just how great the Bible is that we can take things that were written, forever ago, and then modern science and data actually really does support it. Sometimes I think it's funny, we'll be driving around and we'll see things like bumper stickers that says that I'm, pro-choice and I'm pro-science. And I just think that that's just like one of the most ironic bumper stickers out there. But as it pertains to, fasting, it can be really profound. When we eat, insulin rises to store energy and lower our blood sugars. And then when we fast, insulin drops. And that's when the whole body switches gears from storage mode to repair mode. And it's really kind of a beautiful process. A great analogy of this, it's when we get into a fasted state and our body then finds that switch. So it's basically that switch point is when we enter a state of being a sugar burner to a fat burner. So carbohydrate to ketosis. But this process, when we go into fasting, it's pronounced autophagy. The dyslexic in me says autophagia, but it's your body's built-in recycling and personal detox system. When cells get stressed in a good way, like when you haven't eaten for a while, our body starts the cleaning the house. So damaged cells and proteins are broken down, toxins and cellular waste are cleared out, and mitochondria, the energy centers of our cell, can repair and replace outgrown parts. And I've heard the phrase earlier this week. It says we don't need to starve, we just need to give our digestive system a break. And I thought that was a kind of a beautiful way to understand a little bit about autophagy or fasting and intermittent fasting. What we do know from an intermittent fasting standpoint, sometimes we get emotionally attached to like, oh, I have to go and I have to withhold, and that's scary and emotional. But really, it's time restricted eating, I think, can sometimes be a different way of looking at that. When we get people to kind of change from eating from sun up to sundown, and we tighten that window, your body will thank you for it. And now there's nuances. Some people, their stress is too high, they're too far, depending on where they're at this stage of the game. This isn't for everybody right out of the gate. Some people should have medically supervised transitions to get into the intermittent fasting state. But again, the good thing about the internet is there's a ton of resources that can help give you suggestions depending on if you're perimenopausal, postmenopausal, have a lot of adrenal issues going on. It's sometimes like, if we went to the gym and did the exact same workout every single day, we're not going to make the gains. And sometimes we need to change up the workout, change the strain on the body if we want a different performance encounter, right?
Better result, yeah.
Yeah, a better result. Thank you. But after about 12 hours without food, your body burns through the stored glucose and starts breaking down fat for energy. And the liver converts the fat into ketones, which is a clean burning fuel for the brain and the muscles. This is where a lot of people, they talk about fasting as like their limitless drug,
right, that
they just feel so good and it's naturally. But a lot of times, too, when I've had patients that I'll encourage a 16 to 8 fast. So a 16-hour window of when you're fasting, and then an 8-hour window of when you eat your food. So really, it's not a ridiculous, thing to wrap your head around. So if you were to eat your first meal at noon, your last meal would be at 8 o'clock, which I feel like for moms of teenagers and dads of teenagers, that's a really sweet spot just based on the season that we're in. Yeah. In my opinion, that's not the most ideal. However,
I couldn't sleep if I ate that late.
And when you really want to be done eating, again, to be a perfectionist or optimal about this, is you really want to be done eating at least 3 hours before you go to bed. So that window isn't smart. But if you had your first meal at 10 a.m., your last meal would need to be at 6 p.m. If you ate at 8 a.m. as your first meal, we would want you to be done by 4. So depending on where you're at, if your kids are out of the house, that's a way easier window. Yeah. And even if you did the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. window. But a lot of times when we are encouraging our patients to move to this, I've had more patients than not end up pulling off like a 24-hour fast because they felt so good,
right,
or that they waited longer, or that they only then ate one meal because of how much their brain turned on, that they're like, I felt so much stronger without any of that. And I think that that's probably biblically what some of these people were feeling during that process.
100%. I started intermittent fasting a number of years ago, and have tried a variety of different, the 16 and 8, 20 and 4. I've even done 22 and 2. And the reason that those numbers changed like that was because I was feeling so good. What I realized was almost like what you were talking about with working out. If you just keep doing it every day that way, all of a sudden you've hit your wall. It's easy to do. And so I'm kind of in a process now where I'll, try to eat regular for a couple days out of the week. Mm-hmm. A couple days out of the week, I'm intermittent fasting, and then at least one day a week. But I try for 2. I'll just fast the whole day, and the manner in which my body responds to that is so phenomenal. Clarity of mind, even opportunity. There's the spiritual side of that, where I feel myself drawing closer to the Lord. I have that much more time to focus on Him and His Word and in prayer. But there's also the physical side. I actually am stronger in my workouts on days that I'm eating less, which doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah. But it's amazing. I love this topic and conversation.
Yeah, there's a product that we like. It's called Delta ketone esters. You can probably Google it and find their website. And they even have Ironman triathletes that are doing Ironman in a state of ketosis. And they're using their product to help keep them in that state. But most endurance athletes, the rule of thumb was carbohydrates. Right. And my endurance athletes, when sometimes you look at their pure sugar consumption, it's overwhelming because it's the fast fuel. But some of these endurance athletes that are going into the ketosis, it's funny what they're getting for PRs once they're switching to being in ketosis on performance day.
Wow. That's really fascinating. And like I said, I've seen it in my own life. I think I've seen it in the lives of a lot of friends. I've done a lot of combat sports, and a lot of the guys within the kickboxing or jiu-jitsu ranks, even MMA, it's just a natural part of their lives. And I've only recently started to be introduced to some of these ketone products. Yeah. I haven't tried any yet. In full transparency, I kind of tried one once. and it was a can of something. I actually have some in my fridge in my office. I could show you. And it was so terrible that I just said, well, I'll just do it the old fashioned way.
Yeah.
But, it might be that good for you if you're willing to try it. So how does fasting support your body? When we're talking about all of those amazing benefits, autophagy and all of that, where does it get into, like hormones, got all of that?
Yeah. So, insulin actually is a hormone, but we've been I shouldn't say we've been brainwashed, but so much of us, we think insulin is just a blood sugar thing, but it is a hormone. And so it also helps with gut repair and energy regulation. So insulin sensitivity improves, meaning you burn fuel more efficiently. So we do a fasting insulin on all of our patients and pretty commonly, and we want that fasting insulin to be below 7. The reason why we want it to be below 7 is because the higher that number rises, that's a sign of insulin resistance. So when we have a patient, and if they eat a banana, we want our pancreas to squeeze a little bit and lower that blood sugar as a result of eating the banana. Over time, though, if we get chronically bombarded with sugar at every single meal, and that could be naturally occurring sugar, like from like a banana and strawberry fruit smoothie, that insulin, when you do it, your insulin or your pancreas basically is like a dump truck, just overloading your system in order to lower that blood sugar regulation. So when we go into that fasting state, it really helps improve that number tremendously, which can really help reverse a lot of type 2 diabetes and even pre-diabetes.
Wow.
We've had some patients that they really take the fasting seriously, and if they want to elect to do the extra credit with the ketones, I had a guy that we found out within probably like a 6-week period, he had such improvement in his insulin sensitivity, and he had been a type 2 diabetic for 20 years. We found out that he was getting some side effects that he wasn't feeling good, but it's because his medications were too much.
Oh, wow.
Like we needed him to lower his metformin. He was on a lot of meds specifically for his blood sugars. But yeah, so it's pretty incredible on what, especially guys are so much easier to help fix because women, we're just fun and complex. But yeah, then growth hormone increases, supporting muscle repair and metabolism. And so anytimes too, like our athletes have an injury and they're wanting to get back in the game faster, doing some of that fasting is really truly going to help from a cellular level as well. And then the gut lining gets more times to rest and regenerate versus chronic bombardment and chronic having to work. Inflammation isn't always a bad thing. Too much inflammation is the problem. And the fueling of inflammation can also be the problem. But Jeremy, if I were to take a baseball bat and take it to your bicep tendon there's going to be an inflammatory process, but that is part of your body healing itself.
Right.
It's just that we need to make sure that it doesn't stay in that constant state of inflammatory process. And so again, I promise not to take a baseball bat to your arm anytime soon. But yeah, there's different types of fasting. Again, with our practice, a lot of times we do a 12 to 16 hour ratio. So 16 to 8 ratio or 20 to 4 ratio. Eating within a daily window is helpful. And then again, if you're bold, especially for men, a once or twice a week fast, dinner to dinner can be very helpful. And it deepens the autophagy and the insulin reset. Some women though don't do well with the 24-hour fast because it's so caloric restrictive. And again, it just depends on where they're at phase in the game. And then you'd kind of mentioned this earlier, there's the Daniel fast, that plant-based whole foods only. And then the extended fast, the 2 to 3 days, which again, I think anytime you do a fast, it's helpful to keep that spiritual component first.
Yes.
They were the OG. They were the ones that, really brought this too.
And it just really shows you God's hand in all of it. Like I said, fasting is really found throughout Scripture. And then now in our modern world, we're hearing about all of these benefits and experiencing them ourselves. Yes, on that spiritual level, but also, listen, God knew how good it was for our bodies. And 100%, you have to believe that was a big part of what he was doing for us, for sure. So what happens to the brain when you fast? Yeah,
this is a thing that I think I observe most people report, that it causes... they feel so much better, but why they feel so much better is because fasting raises dopamine and epinephrine slightly, giving that alertness without the crash. Tyler, my husband, he thought I was crazy when I was like, hey, we're going to start fasting. And he's like, I eat right away at 5 a.m. when I wake up. Oh, wow. You want me to wait till 10 a.m.? Like, that's impossible. I was like, hey, just trust me. Granted, I did let him have the bulletproof coffee regimen. Yeah. But yeah, he really, so now it's like whenever we travel, we can't not take our ketones with us just because that morning coffee. And it really actually helps like from a satiation standpoint too. And that's by way, in some regards, because of this dopamine and epinephrine. Another byproduct that happens as a result of fasting to the brain is that there's an increase of what's called brain-derived neurotropic factor. And I like to say it's kind of like the organic Miracle-Gro for neurons.
Okay.
And when I say the organic Miracle-Gro, this doesn't promote cancer growth in any way. This is probably more of the anti-cancer growth for the neurons, brain cells, and nerve cells. And then the autophagy to the neurons. So if you can get the cellular housekeeping and the recycling of the neurons of your brain, it reduces your risk of dementia. And they found too in some patients that have early onset cognitive decline, when they get them in a fasted or ketosis state, they can actually, some of those patients, their diagnosis gets reversed as a result of that, which is pretty profound for patients and family members that have that. But yeah, if you've ever fasted and felt weirdly more focused, it's not in your head, it's a neurochemical response, and probably why it's mentioned so frequently in the Bible.
I think we could all use a little bit more of that these days for sure. And I think one of the most common things I hear from people is, I'm tired, but also, boy, I've got this crazy brain fog. Mm-hmm. And I have found that intermittent fasting, limiting certain things in your diet, adding the other things that maybe are better things, has just in and of itself helped to alleviate a lot of that. So what about metabolic medicine? What's the perspective there?
Yeah, so one of the things that we think is important to track is like visceral fat, and that can be done on a whole body DEXA scan. Locally, Mercy Medical, you can do that. It's about $100 cash pay, or another scale is what's called an in-body, and it'll tell us how much fat we have around the organ. So we have patients that have a beautiful BMI, which BMI I don't love. I think it's a horrible biomarker, but yet agreed. That is the standard of care, that they'll have a beautiful BMI, but in reality, they're a skinny fat. They've got a lot of visceral fat in between the organs, so in between the liver, gallbladder, small intestine. And that visceral fat, the higher that visceral fat level is, that it's really kind of like a breeding ground for major metabolic disease like heart disease, certain types of cancers, and early cognitive decline. So when we get into that fasting state, we can see drastic reductions in that visceral fat because that's the first mobilized. So from a metabolic, like overall health improvement, that can be pretty profound. And then, like I said earlier, just that growth hormone secretion, and especially in the those longer fasts actually get more of that growth hormone secretion. So if somebody is trying to heal from a stroke, a concussion, cancer, even, there's a lot of evidence in the oncology world of ketosis. Getting into ketosis state on days of chemotherapy have drastically reduced chemotoxic effects and side effects. Some patients are bold and do 48-hour fast before they go into their chemotherapy. And, I think a lot of oncologists, if they're very in the conventional model, they get worried, and they get worried because they're so used to seeing patients on chemotherapy lose weight. And that's a problem. Sure. Conventional medicine is not watching if they're losing body fat or if they're losing skeletal muscle. If the patient's losing skeletal muscle, then that is an absolute problem. But if they're losing body fat, that's actually much more protective, even if there's an overall weight loss. So again, just working, if a patient's in that state and wants to be bold and do ketosis as part of their treatment plan, with conventional medicine, sure. That can be a wildly helpful thing as well.
I'll tell you, I saw a podcast the other day talking. It was a guy who had cancer and was given just these terrible, prospective outcomes. And, he was following some medical advice as well, but added fasting to the protocols. And, even his doctor believes that helped him kind of turn the tide. So, yeah, I mean, what about men versus women? How does it work in that range?
Yeah, so men are jerks.
Amen.
And, no, men are very lucky because they're the same metabolically, hormonally every 24 hours. Your testosterone gets recycled at night, manufactured at night, and you guys are just, the steady eddies when we look at your metabolic markers.
Nice.
Women are amazingly complex. God has his first,
indeed.
he first designed Adam and then gave us Eve. So female 2.0, but women's bodies are just more sensitive to perceived calorie scarcity, especially in premenopausal women. What we see observationally is a lot of women, especially if they're trying to lose weight, they're actually malnourished. And when you're malnourished, but potentially overweight, you're in fat preservation. And so we need to get from fat preservation, or basically starvation, because your body doesn't know when it's going to get its next meal. We need to get it to that state where it's fat mobilization, where it's using and burning that excess fat as a fuel source. So perimenopausal women, fasting can improve insulin sensitivity and reduce hot flashes, support the liver detox pathways, but should not be pair and long fast with low protein intake. So a lot of times, when I'm encouraging people, if they're going to do it, we really need them, even in a time restricted window, to be getting 80 to 100 grams of protein a day. And that is hard.
Yeah,
you feel like you're eating a lot. And a lot of women, when I'm walking them through their plan and my suggestions, they're like, I'm eating double, if not triple, of what I was eating. And I'm like, they get scared that they're going to gain weight. And oftentimes that's not what happens. Every once in a while we get somebody that they're metabolically a little bit more difficult, but we got to just kind of help support them from an individual. And then postmenopausal women are just more metabolically to behave like men, just because we don't have this significant estrogen progesterone fluxes. And so women, I know sometimes once they're in that postmenopausal state, they just want to, throw their hands up and say, the heck with it. But really, postmenopausal women, they're actually more paired up to see quicker benefits compared to where they were before that postmenopause state.
So is fasting for everybody, or are there certain folks that need to use caution?
Yeah, I mean, I think with anything that you're going to do, especially if,
Sure.
if it's a shock to the system, especially, there's sometimes that patients want to jump into something and there's underlying conditions that they don't even know that they have. So I prefer people to be under the care or direction of somebody who's fasting literate.
Sure.
A lot of times I'll hear that primary cares quickly dismiss diet and say it doesn't matter, which I think is, we need to go back to biochemistry 101.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. So I just for the safety of patients, I would love for them to be, if there's any sort of potential underlying conditions, if it's somebody, like you started doing it on your own, but you were in a fairly good health state before.
Right.
Some patients have medical anxiety and will tailspin and overthink and create more issues, but it's hard to discern. And so it's just helpful to be under the care or supervision for many of our patients as well.
A lot of sense. So fasting wisely then, start slow. Is there, just jump right in? 12-hour overnight fast, that seems like a good place to start. One of the things I've learned with fasting is how important hydration is along with fasting. I've noticed that it's sometimes a lot harder to properly hydrate. And so I've added some of the element packets and things I know that I can get from you guys. Breaking fast gently, that's something I learned as a young man in Christ. You fast for 24 hours and then you go out with everybody from church that was fasting together and you have a big stack of pancakes and then you just feel absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a right way to do it. Protein, fiber, healthy fats, making sure that you're paying attention to what you're putting in your body at the end of it, and then rest, pray throughout. Certainly all of it is just absolutely key. Rest is an important part, although as you fast longer and your body gets used to it, you can push pretty hard through it. And then, again, don't overdo it. The goal is balance. It's not burnout. I think when you fast with intention and not obsession, you'll feel peace and not pressure. So that's certainly an important part in all this. So
I just wanted to add a quick thing for if you are in a season of life where you can't fast, like let's say you're a nursing mom or something like that, or your adrenals are burnt out and stressful, you don't need to go this hard. There are ways, like if I'm trying to, just be more intentional about my time with God, I will Whole30. So it's not a fast, but we are still removing, sugars and things from our diet that are inflammatory to help us focus. And you are still, have to be mindful, and it is improving, it's good for your body.
Right.
So there are ways that you can kind of tweak your diet. You're not going to get into ketosis, but for the spiritual aspect, you can fast and
awesome.
change things up so that you're able to participate in that way.
Right. And, on the spiritual side, at times when, I have a friend who, has some physical limitations and isn't able to fast from food. And so I encourage them, fast from your digital devices, fast from TV, fast from your phone. So we're running out of time. We're going to quickly recap here. Nutrition, it's about fueling well. Fasting is about resting well. Together, they remind us health isn't just about what we consume. It's about how we honor God's perfect design. I'll tell you what, why don't we close in prayer? Dr. Kala, would you close us out?
Yeah, thank you. Lord, thank you for the gift of balance, for the food that nourishes, that was given by you, and fasting that renews. Teach us to steward our bodies with gratitude, to eat with intention, and to fast with faith.
Amen. Thanks for listening, y'all. Thanks for listening to Whole Health Podcast, to our radio program. Be sure to check us out online, wholehealthlive.com, where you can learn more about us, get in touch with these ladies to set up an appointment, maybe to sit down and talk to them about your health specifically, ask some questions, and you can also listen to past episodes. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for joining us today on Whole Health. If you'd like to learn more about our program, have a question for our hosts, or want to find past episodes, just head to wholehealthlive.com.